The safest way to expose a being disguised as a human was not to study its face. It was to ask about its childhood. A face could be copied. A voice could be repeated. Familiar gestures could be learned, and recent memories gathered like loose objects from an abandoned room. But childhood was different. It survived in private names, forgotten games, and small moments shared by only a few people. Such memories were rarely spoken aloud. They left no mark on clay. And so, the story claims, they were difficult to steal. In one tale, a family near the outer wall of an unnamed river settlement buried their eldest son after a sudden fever. His grave was close enough that his mother could see the pale earth covering him from the roof. 7 evenings later, he returned. He stood outside the doorway wearing the robe in which he had been buried. He called his mother by name. He knew where the grain jars stood and where his younger brother slept. He remembered recent arguments, asked why the family goat had been sold, and recognized his sister's necklace. He even laughed in the same restrained way, one hand rising toward his mouth. The family opened the door. For 2 days, grief made every detail seem like proof. His mother touched his face and found warmth. His father questioned him about work in the fields, and the returned son answered correctly. Then the youngest child called him by an old nickname. The figure did not respond. It smiled, but the smile came slightly late, as though it understood the affection without understanding the word. The father brought out a small clay animal with one leg missing. The son recognized it, but when asked how the leg had broken, he described the wrong room, the wrong season, and a cousin who had not yet been born. When they asked about a private childhood game, he remained still. When his mother mentioned the night he had feared the moon was following him, his expression became gentle and attentive. But empty. By morning, the family understood that something had come home wearing the shape of their loss. The legend does not say exactly what followed. One version claims that the mother asked the others to stop questioning it. She already knew it was not her son. She simply did not want to lose him again. This is where the mystery of the 9 hidden beings begins, not with something breaking into a home, but with a household opening the door because the imitation offered what grief had taken away. The beings were ranked by age. The youngest depended on the recently dead. Older ones learned to enter families without copying anyone. Later forms occupied archives, temples, courts, and gates. Some remembered settlements that had vanished before written history. And the oldest was not believed to imitate the human face at all. No surviving Mesopotamian tablet confirms this exact list. It belongs to an imagined later legend inspired by ancient ideas about burial, memory, cities, floods, and the uncertain boundary between human order and the unknown beyond it. The countdown begins with the youngest. Number 9, the borrowed one. The borrowed one was said to have appeared after permanent settlements placed the dead close to the living. It possessed no stable face of its own. Instead, it lingered near graves, listening to mourners and watching the paths between burial places and homes. When grief was strongest, it borrowed. It preferred someone recently dead, someone whose habits were still expected and whose place remained painfully empty. It could carry the dead person's voice, gestures, knowledge of daily routines, and fragments of recent memory. What it could not fully recover was the life beneath those fragments. The childhood test exposed this weakness because the earliest years survive not as one clear story, but as scattered details held by parents, siblings, objects, and private jokes. The borrowed one could recognize a childhood toy. It could not always remember why it mattered. A brief variation of the legend tells of a widow whose husband returned beside the family well. He knew where silver was hidden and remembered promising to repair the roof. But he insisted they had first met beside a date grove, though she knew they had met at a market. Soon she stopped correcting him. That was the creature's advantage. It did not need to withstand perfect examination. It needed only to offer enough comfort that the living hesitated to reject it. Still, Number 9 depended on another person's life. It needed a death, a face, a name, and a place already shaped like a particular person. The next being discovered that it did not need to copy anyone at all. It could arrive as a stranger and make the household remember that it had always belonged. Number 8, the hearth stranger. The hearth stranger was associated with the first permanent homes and the communal fires that burned after sunset. It arrived after dark as an exhausted traveler. Dust covered its clothing. Its water skin was nearly empty. It asked only for warmth, a drink, and permission to remain beside the hearth until morning. It appeared polite, grateful, and harmless. The danger began only after permission was given. In one tale, a household near a canal admitted such a traveler during a night of cold rain. The flooded road prevented him from leaving the next morning, and he remained. After several weeks, nobody could agree on when he had arrived. The mother believed he had come before the previous harvest. One son remembered working beside him while the canal was cleared. A young child insisted the stranger had watched her grow. Only the eldest daughter remembered the knock at the door. She remembered the wet cloak, the request for warmth, and the sleeping mat prepared for a guest expected to leave at sunrise. Whenever she described that night, the others looked at her with concern. There had been no knock, they said. He had always slept near the hearth. The daughter searched for evidence. She found a small clay family plaque made when the younger children were born. Each person in the household had pressed a thumb into the wet clay. There was no mark belonging to the stranger. Her mother said he had been away that day. The daughter then recalled a journey the family had taken across the river. She remembered every person in the crowded boat. The stranger could not have been there. Her brothers remembered him sitting near the stern. That evening, he repeated the family's favorite story about the journey. One detail changed. By the following morning, everyone except the daughter remembered his version. The strongest evidence came from outside the house. A relative arrived from another settlement and asked who the traveler was. For a moment, the household fell silent. Then the father became offended. How could their own relative pretend not to know someone who had lived with them for years? The visitor left before sunset, disturbed not by the stranger, but by the family's certainty. The daughter followed him to the road and asked whether he remembered the night of rain. He did. They were now the only two people who did. The legend offers several endings. In the darkest, the daughter eventually apologizes to the stranger. He embraces her as a brother would. And in that instant, she remembers him teaching her to walk. The story never explains whether the hearth stranger truly changes memory or merely introduces a suggestion and allows the family to strengthen it. Shared memories are repeated and reshaped until confidence replaces certainty. Perhaps the stranger altered their minds. Perhaps it only understood how quickly people defend a memory once everyone around them agrees that it is true. Either way, anyone who continued doubting him gradually became the strange person in the household. The next being found a faster path into trust. It did not need a known face. It needed only a familiar voice. Number 7, the voice beneath the floor. This being belonged to stories inspired by early mud brick homes and traditions that sometimes kept the dead close to domestic space. The creature itself remains part of the imagined legend. The story begins when a family hears someone speaking beneath the floor during the night. At first, the sound is so faint that it could be clay settling in the cool air. Then it comes again. A name. Not the name of the dead, but the name of someone listening. In one tale, the voice belonged to a grandmother who had died during the previous winter. Her grave lay beneath a small room used for storage. The first person to hear her was a child sleeping beside the wall. The voice spoke the child's private name. It was a name used only by the grandmother. The parents dismissed the story. Children heard words in ordinary sounds. Houses shifted at night. Then the mother heard it. From below came a phrase the old woman had always spoken when bread was left uncovered. The words were gentle, almost amused. The mother knelt and placed her palm against the floor. The voice fell silent. Over the following nights, it returned in fragments, a blessing, a complaint, a line from an old song. Each phrase was something the dead woman had once used inside the house. Several days later, a stranger entered the settlement. His face was narrow. His hair was dark. He resembled no member of the household. He claimed to be searching for work and denied ever visiting the area before. But when he spoke, the child began to cry. The voice was the grandmother's. Not similar. The same. The stranger insisted that this was the only voice he had ever possessed. When asked to repeat the phrases heard beneath the floor, he refused. Yet every ordinary sentence carried the dead woman's rhythm. The father believed it was a trick. The mother wondered whether the old woman had returned in another form. The child believed neither explanation. He said the stranger was not the grandmother. He only knew how safety had sounded. The family allowed the stranger inside. After he entered the house, the voice beneath the floor stopped. The silence suggested that whatever had been listening below was now seated beside the hearth. One evening, the child asked why he had called from beneath the floor before arriving. The stranger answered in the grandmother's calm voice. "I needed to know which sound would open the door." Before dawn, he disappeared. No hidden body was found. No explanation followed. But for years afterward, whenever a traveler approached the house, the family listened before looking. Number 9 had copied a lost identity. Number 8 had created belonging where none had existed. Number 7 had learned that an unfamiliar face could still be welcomed if it spoke with the sound of protection and home. With that discovery, the legend changes scale. The first 3 beings entered one household at a time. Their world consisted of graves, sleeping mats, private names, shared stories, and the uncertain memories of a few people. But settlements were becoming cities. Spoken promises became marks pressed into clay. Storehouses required accounts. Temples collected records. Gates controlled movement. A person's identity no longer lived only in the memories of relatives. It lived in lists. In seals. In debts, inheritances, boundaries, and official decisions. The hidden beings no longer needed to sit beside every hearth. They needed access to the places where civilization remembered on behalf of thousands. And somewhere before sunrise, while the streets were still dark and the tablet rooms had not yet opened, a scribe was already waiting. Number 6, the sleepless scribe. The earliest beings had entered through emotion. The sleepless scribe entered through certainty. It appeared wherever writing became authority: temple offices, palace archives, granaries, courts, and rooms where agreements were pressed into wet clay and sealed before witnesses. Its appearance changed from one account to another. Sometimes it was an elderly accountant with stained fingers. Sometimes a quiet assistant or advisor who seemed to understand every unopened tablet. One detail remained constant. No one saw it sleep. It was present when the archive closed at night and waiting when the doors opened before sunrise. A lamp often burned beside its place through the darkest hours, though no servant remembered carrying oil into the room. This caused little suspicion. Cities praised officials who appeared tireless. The first warning was usually something smaller. A correction. In one legend, an archivist in a river city was ordered to examine a dispute between 2 families. Both claimed the same field near an irrigation channel. One family possessed a recent record. The other produced an older tablet showing that the boundary had been moved during the reign of a former king. The archivist noticed a mark beside the field measurement. Someone had changed a single sign while the clay was still damp. The altered boundary transferred only a narrow strip of land, but that strip controlled the entrance to the channel. Whoever owned it could decide which fields received water. The tablet carried the seal of an official dead for many years. Nothing seemed impossible until the archivist examined another record. It described an inheritance from several generations earlier. Beside one name was the same correction, leaning slightly to the left, one edge pressed deeper than the other as though made by a damaged stylus. The scribes were different. The hand was the same. The archivist searched contracts, tax lists, grain accounts, and records of ownership. Across generations, the unusual mark appeared in documents written long before any single scribe could have lived. It remained near the edges, a debt carried forward, a boundary moved, an heir's name removed, a defeated ruler described as having ordered a careful withdrawal. Each alteration was small. Together, they revealed a patient influence extending beyond one human lifetime. The changes did not consistently benefit one family, temple, or king. Whatever purpose guided them seemed to exist farther in the future than an ordinary official could plan. The archivist traced the scribes responsible for the tablets. Again and again, a quiet deputy appeared during periods of transition. When an old keeper died, the deputy trained his replacement. When a new ruler took the city, he remained because the incoming court needed someone who understood the old system. The names changed. The position did not. Each identity supposedly belonged to a different family, yet the archivist found no marriage tablets, property records, or burials connected to them. They entered the archive fully trained and vanished from official life without leaving descendants. More troubling were their seals. Tiny scratches and worn edges appeared identically on tablets created generations apart. A flaw belonging to one cylinder seal survived long after that seal should have disappeared with its owner. The being was not merely copying handwriting. It was copying authority. The archivist carried several tablets to the oldest official in the record room and showed him the repeated corrections. One person made these marks, the archivist said. That is impossible. Yes. The old man looked toward the archive door. Dawn had not yet reached the courtyard, but lamplight could already be seen beneath it. Then it cannot be one person, he replied. The answer sounded reasonable. That was how the city protected itself from the impossible. When the archivist entered the tablet room, the sleepless scribe was waiting among the shelves. The legend gives no transformation and no confession. The official simply asked which record the archivist wished to see. On the table lay a new list of archive workers. The archivist's name was missing. By midday, the guards no longer recognized his authority. Another man occupied his room. His family remembered that he had once worked near the temple, but official records described him as a laborer dismissed years earlier. He spent the rest of his life gathering proof of his identity, letters, seals, witness statements, and fragments of accounts. Whenever he found evidence, a more authoritative tablet contradicted it. He still remembered who he had been. The city did not. This was the sleepless scribe's real power. It could wait until witnesses died, families moved, and personal memory weakened. Then the surviving record became the accepted truth. Writing allowed a city to remember beyond a human lifespan. It also created a place where memory could be altered without changing every mind that depended upon it. The changes remained small because enormous lies invited resistance. A revised account could affect a storehouse. A missing name could redirect an inheritance. A changed order could place a different official in command. Years later, no one remembered that another future had once been possible. The legend never explains what the sleepless scribe wanted. It did not gather visible wealth or seek the throne. At times, it preserved records that endangered the ruler it served. At others, it removed truths that might have protected the city. Perhaps it sought power too slowly for humans to recognize. Perhaps it obeyed another intelligence. Or perhaps it preserved a plan whose meaning would become clear only after many generations. Controlling the archive revealed what the city believed about its past. The next being watched what the city might become. Number 5, the man without a shadow. Indoors, he appeared entirely human. That was why most people never noticed him. He stood in shaded corridors, temple entrances, covered markets, and at the edges of royal processions. He wore the clothing of a servant, priest, messenger, or minor official, someone allowed to observe without becoming important. Only direct sunlight revealed the error. Sometimes his shadow moved a moment after his body. Sometimes it pointed in the wrong direction. Sometimes the man stepped forward while the dark shape beneath him remained still. The legend does not describe him as a hunter or warrior. He was a watcher. Stories placed him in temple courtyards when cities expanded their walls, beside processional roads when rulers prepared for war, and near markets when wealth gathered faster than the city could safely manage it. He seemed to count something. No witness knew what. The central tale follows a young temple attendant carrying water across a bright courtyard. As he passed a motionless man in a plain robe, he noticed that the stranger's shadow remained against a column after the body had moved away. The attendant stopped. The shadow corrected itself. When he looked again, nothing appeared unusual. The stranger stood in the sunlight with a calm expression, neither old nor young. The attendant told a senior priest. The priest found only stone, heat, and ordinary shadows. By evening, the story had become a joke, and the young man was advised to rest. Years passed. The attendant became a clerk and then an official responsible for temple property. He married, raised children, and watched the city grow wealthy and increasingly certain of its strength. During a royal procession decades after the first sighting, he saw the silent man again. He had not aged. The same calm face watched from the edge of the courtyard. When he turned, his shadow followed a moment too late. The official no longer trusted memory alone. He searched damaged temple reports, old complaints, and records preserved from earlier administrations. Most contained nothing useful. A silent servant rarely earned a place beside accounts of rulers and offerings. Yet scattered references formed a pattern. A guard described a man counting carts before a period of unrest. A priest mentioned a servant whose shadow pointed east near sunset. A palace worker remembered an unaging messenger known to officials from an earlier generation. Some reports had been written before the official's grandparents were born. The figure appeared most often before political change, conflict, failed harvests, or the weakening of a once confident city. Perhaps he brought disaster. Perhaps he predicted it. Or perhaps he arrived when a city had already created the conditions of its own decline. The official began watching the observer. The man stood near storehouses whose contents had been exaggerated in official accounts. He appeared beside neglected canals while rulers directed labor toward monuments and ceremonies. He watched confidence rise as practical strength weakened beneath it. A city could wear a face just as a hidden being could. Its walls displayed power. Its inscriptions promised victory. Its processions performed order. Beneath that appearance lay debts, rival heirs, neglected fields, and decisions delayed too long. The man without a shadow seemed to study the distance between appearance and condition. By the time the temple attendant had become an old man, the observer remained unchanged. The official approached him in the courtyard at noon. The stranger's shadow pointed toward the gate, though the sun stood almost overhead. "What have you been counting?" the official asked. The man answered with another question. "How many years does a city believe it has?" Then he entered a shaded passage and disappeared. Soon afterward, trade weakened, families left the outer districts, and a new ruler entered through one gate while the old ruler's name was removed from another. The observer was not seen there again. The legend does not decide whether he caused the decline, foresaw it, or merely recognized what the city had already become. Its tension lies in his patience. Cities rose, flourished, and failed far more quickly than he appeared to age. Some versions suggest that he collected information for something older. When a city became powerful enough, or unstable enough, he vanished, as though the measurement had been completed and the result carried elsewhere. The sleepless scribe studied what a city said about its past. The man without a shadow watched its future taking shape. The next being stood where both had to pass through a single opening. Number 4, the gatekeeper. He appeared at city walls, river crossings, bridges, market entrances, and temple gates. He chose positions through which large numbers of people were forced to pass. Unlike the silent observer, the gatekeeper spoke often. He asked travelers for their names, destinations, family connections, and reasons for entering. People answered because the questions belonged to the gate. His most convincing disguise was not his face. It was his function. The legend tells of a merchant family that crossed the same western gate for 3 generations. The first witness was a child traveling beside his father. He remembered the gatekeeper as an old man with pale dust settled into the lines of his hands. The man inspected their wool and warned the father not to return by the southern road. The father ignored him. Floodwater later blocked the route, forcing the caravan to abandon 2 carts. The child grew into a merchant and spent many years traveling between cities. When he returned to the western gate as an adult, the same old man stood beneath the arch. Not a similar son. The same man. The merchant told himself that childhood had distorted his memory. Perhaps this was a relative who had inherited the same voice, posture, and habit of rubbing one thumb across the other. Then the gatekeeper greeted him by name and mentioned the 2 carts lost on the southern road. The merchant had never told the story there. The old man explained that his father had spoken of it years before. This was possible, and the father was dead, so the explanation could not be tested. The merchant passed through. Over the following decades, he saw the gatekeeper many times. Citizens used different names for him. Most assumed the position had passed naturally from father to son, and then to another son who happened to resemble them both. No one had met a wife, brother, or child. There was no house connected to the family. No marriage tablet. No burial record. No ration list naming more than one gatekeeper. There had never been a family line. There was only one man standing at the gate. Near the end of the merchant's life, his daughter began managing the caravans. On her first journey alone, she met the old man beneath the western arch. That evening, she described him to her father. Every detail matched his earliest memory: the dust in the hands, the quiet voice, the thumb moving slowly across the other thumb. The merchant asked what the gatekeeper had said. He told me you once lost 2 carts on the southern road. 3 generations had not passed through the entrance. The same memory had waited at the gate while 3 generations passed. The gatekeeper also made decisions that contradicted the authorities he appeared to serve. When the gates were ordered closed, he sometimes admitted a stranger. When an important visitor carried official permission, he occasionally refused entry. Certain families were warned away, while others were allowed to leave when no one else could pass. At first, the choices seemed arbitrary. Their pattern appeared only much later. A family permitted to escape during a siege carried a rare craft to another settlement. A messenger admitted after nightfall delivered an order that changed who would command the city. An object the gatekeeper tried to stop entered through another gate and appeared generations later inside a temple archive. He did not seem to be protecting the city from every danger. He was deciding what would continue beyond it. Preservation was not the same as protection. A refugee might matter more to the future than the ruler who forced the family to leave. An unwanted object might carry knowledge that survived the city that feared it. The merchant's daughter eventually asked how long he had guarded the western entrance. The old man looked beyond the wall toward a low ridge where no building stood. Before the gate, he replied. She assumed he meant an earlier entrance made of wood or packed earth. Years later, workers repairing the western road discovered a line of stones beneath the ridge. They formed a narrow passage aligned with the city gate, though they lay beneath layers of soil older than the wall. At the center was a worn foundation marked by two shallow hollows. They matched the places where the gatekeeper rested his feet. The discovery changed the meaning of all three beings. The sleepless scribe controlled memory. The man without a shadow observed development. The gatekeeper controlled continuity. Perhaps they were not three unrelated creatures, but three functions within one hidden system. Whoever designed such a system did not need to rule openly. Kings could change. Dynasties could disappear. Temples could burn and walls could be rebuilt. The hidden positions would remain. Yet the buried crossing suggested that the system had not begun with the city. The gatekeeper had not chosen the western entrance after the walls were raised. The walls may have been raised around the place where he was already standing. Beneath the city were older routes. Beneath those routes lay the mud of vanished rivers and settlements erased from memory. And somewhere beyond the oldest crossing, the legend placed a traveler who remembered walking those roads before the world was covered by water. Number 3, the Flood Walker. He appeared in different cities under different names, carrying little more than a staff, a water skin, and knowledge no traveler should have possessed. He never claimed to be a king, a god, or an immortal. When asked where he came from, he named a settlement no living person recognized. Most assumed it stood beyond the horizon. The truth was stranger. It lay beneath them. The Flood Walker belonged to an imagined legend shaped by Mesopotamia's ancient flood traditions. No surviving flood tablet describes this exact being. Within the story, however, he remembered settlements buried beneath mud and water before the oldest living dynasty began. He knew where vanished canals had flowed, where wells had been sealed, and where roads continued beneath fields that appeared untouched. One tale tells of a ruler approached by such a traveler during a season of low water. The stranger requested laborers, digging tools, and permission to open the ground beyond the northern wall. The ruler asked what he expected to find. A door, the traveler replied. There were no visible ruins in that place. Shepherds had crossed the land for generations without finding a broken wall. Yet the Flood Walker described a buried settlement in precise detail. A street had once run east from a well. Beyond it stood a large foundation, and beneath that foundation a stair descended toward a chamber closed before the waters came. The ruler demanded proof. The traveler pointed to a patch of dry earth and told the workers to dig. They found an old well. Its upper stones had been removed and its mouth packed with clay. Beneath the clay waited water darkened by centuries of stillness. Workers followed the stranger's directions. Beneath layers of sediment they uncovered walls, a narrow street, and the edge of an ancient foundation. At its center stood a doorway sealed from the outside. This troubled the builders. The buried settlement had not simply vanished. Its inhabitants had closed the entrance carefully and removed the signs that might guide anyone back. Someone had wanted the place forgotten. The Flood Walker urged them to open it. Beyond the stones, a stair descended into a cool passage marked with signs no scribe could read. The passage did not lead toward the heart of the buried city. It pointed toward the ruler's unfinished temple. The two places were separated by centuries and layers of flood mud. Yet the underground route and the new temple shared the same alignment. The ruler ordered the doorway closed. By morning, the Flood Walker had disappeared. Years later, builders extending the temple found another sealed opening beneath its foundation. The marks inside matched those in the buried passage. The new city had unknowingly completed a route begun before the older settlement was abandoned. The Flood Walker had not created the pattern. He had restored a connection interrupted by water, destruction, and forgetting. At times, his knowledge appeared useful. He revealed old wells and channels that could be reopened during drought. But the same knowledge could persuade rulers to rebuild what earlier people had deliberately sealed. Was he preserving something that should not be lost? Or restoring a plan others had tried to end? The ruler once asked how he had survived the flood. The traveler answered that surviving was less difficult than remembering the roads afterward. Then the ruler asked who had first shown him those roads. For the first time, the flood walker hesitated. "I followed the one who taught people where to build." Number 3 remembered civilization before the flood. But he had once been a follower. Number 2, the first teacher. The first teacher entered the legend before walls, archives, royal courts, and permanent gates. It approached communities that already possessed language, tools, cooperation, and knowledge gathered through generations of experience. It did not create human intelligence. It organized it. In one tale, the teacher visited a river community once each season. It showed the people how changing shadows could help them anticipate the turning of the year. It improved the way grain was stored above damp ground. It helped guide water toward fields, mark boundaries, count goods, and coordinate labor beyond a single household. Each lesson solved a real problem. Harvests lasted longer. Disputes became easier to settle. Larger groups could work together, and knowledge survived beyond one generation. The teacher demanded no worship. It asked only that the lessons be followed in the proper order. Years later, a woman responsible for measuring grain noticed that the lessons were not separate. The storehouses stood beside the counting room. The counting room faced a central courtyard. The courtyard opened toward an entrance aligned with the marker used to observe the seasons. Water channels divided the settlement, and roads directed movement toward the same controlled points. No single decision had created the arrangement. Each useful lesson had placed one piece. The woman drew the settlement's layout on clay. Seen together, the buildings, channels, gates, and observation platform formed the same pattern carved on the teacher's staff. She confronted it during its next visit. "Why did you not show us the whole design?" The teacher replied that people rejected a structure when they saw only its demands. They accepted it when each part arrived as the answer to an immediate need. The words could be understood as wisdom. They could also be understood as a confession. Every lesson brought a benefit. But every benefit created a position from which it could be controlled. Stored grain required guardians. Water channels required maintenance. Boundaries required judgment. Counts required record keepers. Shared labor required officials. Growing settlements required gates. The systems that made a city possible also created the places later occupied by the hidden beings. The sleepless scribe belonged in the record room. The man without a shadow belonged in the courtyard. The gatekeeper belonged at the entrance. Perhaps they invaded civilization after it was built. Or perhaps civilization had contained places waiting for them from the beginning. An invader must overcome resistance. A necessary official is welcomed. No one questions the scribe for keeping records or the gatekeeper for asking who may enter. Authority becomes camouflage. Yet the teacher's lessons genuinely protected the community. They preserved food, organized water, and allowed knowledge to survive. That was why the woman did not order the design destroyed. By then, the settlement depended upon it. Removing the counting room would threaten the storehouses. Abandoning the channels would damage the fields. Opening the gate would leave families unprotected. The design was no longer separate from their lives. She asked whether it belonged to humanity. "It belongs to whoever continues it," the teacher said. Some versions describe number 2 as a single being. Others treat the title as something carried by several teachers across different ages. A darker reading suggests that it was only an intermediary preparing the human world for something older. When the elders asked where the design had come from, the teacher led them to a weathered stone beyond the settlement. Most of the carving had been erased by wind. One shape remained. A face. Human in its proportions. But carved, the teacher claimed, before any human settlement had stood there. Number 1, the one who was already here. The oldest being did not arrive. That is the first difference. It did not descend from the sky, rise from beneath the earth, or cross from another land. The legend gives it no journey because it was already present when the first humans appeared. Something older than humanity should have been easy to recognize. It should have looked separate from us. But the darkest version of the story reverses that expectation. The one who was already here did not copy human faces. Human faces partly resembled it. The legend does not clearly claim that it created humanity. It may describe a supernatural ancestor, an ancient pattern, or a fear projected backward toward the beginning of human memory. Yet within the tale, the resemblance explains why appearance cannot expose it. The younger beings each carry a fragment of the same power. One borrows identity. Another creates familiarity. Others imitate trusted voices, written authority, patience, continuity, and knowledge surviving across lost ages. Number one may be the original pattern they imperfectly reproduce. This is where the childhood test returns. The borrowed one could be exposed because it entered a life after that life had begun. It might recognize a toy yet fail to remember how it broke. There was a past from which it was absent. But the test could not expose number one. Its memories would belong to a world before human families, private names, settlements, or archives. No witness could confirm them, and no record would reach far enough. Any evidence used to judge the being would come from systems shaped by the teacher and guarded by the scribe. The investigation would be trapped inside the structure it was trying to understand. Several possibilities remain. The 9 beings may be separate legendary figures connected by later storytellers because they embody related fears, false memory, uncertain identity, strangers, authority, and knowledge that survives beyond those who created it. They may instead be different forms of one intelligence adapting as human society changed. When people lived in households, it entered through grief and familiarity. When settlements became cities, it entered through records, observation, and gates. When destruction erased cities, it carried the design forward. Before all those forms, it existed without disguise. There is also a symbolic reading. The oldest being may not be a physical creature at all. It may be the pattern through which useful systems begin to serve purposes no individual intended. A record created to preserve truth can erase a life. A gate built for safety can decide who belongs. A structure built to organize a community can become too necessary to question. Under this interpretation, number one survives not by wearing a human body, but by reproducing itself through institutions. The supernatural possibility never fully disappears. The ancient face remains. The buried route still aligns with the later temple. The gatekeeper waits at a crossing older than the city around it. And the legend's final warning is not that control always begins with force. It often begins by becoming useful. Then familiar. Then trusted. And finally official. The first family accepted the returned son because grief wanted him to be real. The household accepted the hearth stranger because belonging felt safer than doubt. The city trusted the scribe because records were necessary. Travelers obeyed the gatekeeper because every gate seemed to require someone who decided who could pass. Each being answered a genuine human need. That was how it entered. A disguise succeeds not only because it is convincing, but because accepting it solves a problem that rejecting it would force people to face alone. The childhood question exposed the borrowed one because it had arrived late. Number one had no such weakness. No family could say, "You were not there," because its story begins before families. No official record could challenge it because it was older than official memory. And if human faces partly resemble its own, there is no hidden appearance waiting to be revealed. Perhaps the oldest being has never needed to pretend to be human. Perhaps the younger creatures are only unfinished attempts to reproduce what it already possessed: memory without limit, familiarity without introduction, authority without conquest, and patience without age. Or perhaps humanity created the legend to describe a quieter fear. We build systems to protect what matters. Then those systems outlive us. They preserve choices, repeat mistakes, and guide people who no longer remember why the structure was built. Outside the ancient city, the river continues through darkness. Mud gathers over roads and foundations. Gates collapse. Tablets return slowly to clay. The names of rulers fade while the arrangement beneath their cities remains. Somewhere in the story, a traveler still remembers the buried route. A gatekeeper waits where the walls have vanished. A scribe sits beside records no living person can challenge. And behind them is the possibility of a presence that cannot be recognized by face, voice, shadow, age, or memory because those tests belong to a world it may have helped design. The mystery is no longer whether creatures could hide within civilization. It is whether civilization itself became the perfect disguise.